All right, welcome to technical session number 47. We're going to be talking about securing SOHO wired and wireless networks. Continuing on that security journey that we've been talking about for today. Some of the objectives we're going to be getting into this afternoon. We're going to be talking about explaining the value of going that extra effort to protect the data on a SOHO network. We're going to be talking about some strategies for securing both wired and wireless networks, and describing the unique strategies for securing a wireless SOHO network. BSMs we want to keep in mind for this particular technical session are adaptability and persistence. As we've figured, learned a lot yesterday, the threats to our networks are ever changing, ever evolving, and we have to be able to change with that if we want to keep our networks secure. And whenever we are faced with a threat or a troubleshooting problem, we need to maintain persistence because we may not succeed in our first efforts. So we need to keep pushing past those first few times we stumble. Any failures we have, look at that as a learning experience and a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. Remember, we talked about that earlier. What's the difference between a stepping stone and a stumbling block? It's your perception of it. Are you going to let that stumbling block take you down, or are you going to use it as a way to learn and build yourself up? All right. The importance of protecting our SOHO routers. Tomas, can you read for us, please?
Whether you're using a wired router or a wireless one, it is not configured. If it is not configured properly, it could pose potential security risks. If your wireless network is unsecured or open, an intruder can easily gain access to your internet network resources as well as the internet, all without your consent. Once the intruder has access to your network, he/she can use a variety of operations such as to steal your internet bandwidth, perform disruptive or illegal acts, steal your sensitive information, perform denial of service (DOS) attacks to make the network unusable by sending out false requests, infest the network with malicious threats.
Thank you. Most commonly, they're going to be just stealing internet bandwidth, especially in like apartment complexes or something like that. If you don't lock down your internet and change your default passwords and stuff like that, they're just going to be logging on and using your bandwidth to watch Netflix or Hulu or what have you. I may or may not have done this for like 4 or 5 years when I first moved to Florida, but eventually people learn to secure their networks, and then you got to get your own. But sometimes there are going to be some malicious actors that are going to essentially, if they're going to perform an illegal act, they're not going to do it on their own network. They're going to utilize someone else's network if that is available. That way, if the threat is traced back to the network, it's going to trace back to you and your network, not necessarily them. They may want to steal sensitive information. You're a little less worried about security measures in your own home. You think, I'm in my house, everything's cool, it's all good. So they could be watching transactions. They could be, having sniffers running. They could be looking for you logging into your bank accounts or Amazon or, Books A Million or what have you. So anywhere you might do any shopping so that they can glean some of that information, have access to those accounts, or get personally identifiable information from you and set up new accounts in your name. And denial of service, again, less likely on home networks, but still within the realm of possibility. And then the ever-present threat of malware. So here's some steps we can take to secure our networks. We're going to be going over each of these in detail, from changing your default usernames and passwords, which I hope all of you have done to your routers. you know, to other things like updating the firmware, disabling ports, firewall settings, all that kind of fun stuff. So first, most basic, please change the default name and password to your network once you get it. It's not as much of an issue today, but like 5-10 years ago, people would buy a wireless router from like Linksys or something like that, and then they would just plug it in and see what the default username and password was on it and use it to go online and connect to the internet. But the thing is manufacturers use generic ones that are kind of unique to their company, so people know exactly what company launches it when they see that username, because I think Linksys had like, it was like Linksys and then some numbers. You could go in and say, okay, the default password is PASWD. And then you can log into that router, get online, no problem, all that fun stuff. Nowadays, most techs, when they're setting up the networks, will ask you, what do you want to name the network? And they'll ask you to put in the username and password, thankfully. So if you have old users that are no longer active for your company, you may have a policy where if somebody leaves the company, you'll make them inactive for like 6 months, just in case they end up coming back. Maybe they're gone on sabbatical or something like that, and then they may come back a little bit later. So you may have a policy, keep their profile in the system for 6 months. Then if they do not return at that time, then we delete the accounts. So have some policy in place where if you have users that are not needed, get them off of your systems, you know, over a certain period of time. Obviously, disable guest accounts. Another, as we talked about this a couple of times, it's a so-called security issue, easily bypassable, but it is a layer. If you have just a few devices on your network, I would say 10 or less, you could do something called MAC filtering, where you're taking the MAC address of each device and entering them into a list. And then basically it will look at that list. If you're trying to enter the network, if your MAC address is not on the list, you'll be denied access to the network. So it's an allow list for MAC filtering. The other term they use for it is called network lock. So you have network lock and MAC filtering. Those can be used interchangeably. Yes, Kali.
Well, with the MAC filtering though, like if you make a guest account on your wireless network, does that also apply to the guest account, or can you just put it for the main account and then leave the guest open?
The guest accounts I was talking about disabling was mostly for your computers on your network.
Oh, okay, okay.
Sorry if I was not clear on that. You can set up a guest network on your Wi-Fi, but again, I would use a strong password on it and only give them the password when they come. And I would recommend changing it like once a month if you have frequent guests. It still allows them access to use your internet, which again, I'm not saying your guests would do this, but if somebody has access to that and they perform like a denial of service attack, like initiate one from your house, then you could potentially be liable because it's initiating from your network.
Okay, because I always thought like because you make a guest one, it just like it's like even though it's part of your network, it was like separate in a way. Like
yes,
you know,
meaning they won't have access to your shared files and folders. So there is kind of that barrier between your internal network and them, but they're still accessing the internet on your network. It's still part of your network.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay.
So just something to consider.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Assigning static IP addresses. Okay. That was an excited screen. All right. So if you have a small enough network where it's easy to manage the IPs, you can assign a static IP to each host, and then you can filter based off of the IP addresses. And, again, this is one of those instances where technically it's a security measure, but if somebody's able to figure out what the IP addresses of your computers on your system, this can be bypassed by them spoofing that IP. Because you can go in and turn on a static IP and make your IP whatever you want. So it's one of those things where it technically is a security measure, but in reality, somebody can bypass it relatively easily. Yes, Golly.
Yeah, sorry. For the static IP address, I didn't really understand them. So a static IP address is it's like an IP address that you make up. It's not like.
Well, you have two types. You have static and dynamic. So
Right.
Static means I will be putting in the IP address. So based off of what our IT department has determined is the available IP addresses on the network, I could pick one of those and put it in there.
Okay.
And then since it's static, it's not going to change. So
Okay.
I've marked it as static. I put in an IP, a subnet mask, a DNS server, and I'm on my way, and default gateway. Now, the other way is a dynamic, which is how most of us get our IPs, where we communicate with our DHCP server, and it will lease us an IP address. So it'll say, here's this IP address, you can have it for the next 7 days. And so for the next 7 days, I'll have it, and then it will issue me a new one at that time. Once that lease expires, I don't have an IP, I have to request another one. They'll issue me another one for 7 days.
Okay, so we talking about this in a office area. That's not like something you'll do at home. Like
Yeah, you can
you do it at home now. You use you use a dynamic DHCP server right now.
So then when you say the DHCP kind of lease you the IP address, so does that mean my IP address, if it's leased from the DHCP, it changed every so often? It's
Yes.
not the same?
Yeah.
Or if you could hold on to it forever if your machine stays on and never disconnects from that network. Then or it could actually have a Mac lease, like it could be there for a long period of time. Like, you remember we were talking about the automatics and the manuals from earlier, Gali?
Yeah.
So you can actually, your router can actually hold on to that address, that MAC address, and say, okay, next time I see this person, I'm going to give them this IP again. Right? Or it could be basically, I'll hold on to it for only a week, and then I'll give him a new IP if I see him again. Or I'll never remember this guy, and when he comes back, I'll give him something fresh. But you asked a question that I want to make sure that's clear, though. You said if it's something we make up, the DSCP, the same IP address that they'll give you in the DSCP, the same formatting is the same. That's a part of the structure. Right. So if say that you're a 192.168.1. whatever, that's the same thing you would assign to yourself statically. And
I wouldn't put a 10.0.0.1 in there.
Exactly.
Well,
you would.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you for clearing that. But that's why I was confused about, and even when I did the lab, I was confused about. It's like, where do you get the static IP address and know that it's available? Because
it's from your scheme. Yeah.
Huh?
It's from your scheme. So whatever your gateway address is, usually for that subnet is what you would assign to your static IP address. So if your gateway address is 192.168.1.1, then usually your static IP addresses would match that format and change the last octet.
Okay, yeah, because I know in the lab it was like, oh, get the IP address from your system network administrator. But I was like, who is that? And how would you know like somebody else is not using that same IP address? Like, because then the DHCP is not giving you this address. It's you who's just making well, I guess not making it up now, but I just didn't understand where you would get the static IP address and know that nobody else is using it. That's like, you got that one. So that's,
Yeah.
I was confused about that.
Yeah, so you'd usually have also, a list of all your IP addresses that are already assigned, whatever tool you're using. If you're using, the DNS from a server, or if you're utilizing Angry IP or some kind of IP scanner to see what's already been assigned, or if you're tracking them on paper, some people do that still. So, whatever you have assigned statically, you basically have that listed somewhere, and you just choose one of the open numbers.
Okay, yeah, okay, so thank you. This is what I was missing throughout this whole thing, because I didn't get that part. I was like, I didn't know people were just pulling them out of thin air or just making
No,
them.
no.
I figured that's what you're asking. Yeah, man. No
Thank you,
problem.
thank you. I got it now. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Sorry, I wasn't clear enough on that one.
No, that's okay. All right.
All right, so IP filtering essentially. Next, DMZ or demilitarized zone. If you guys remember that horrible graphic that I drew where the two firewalls and you had the servers in between it, this is kind of a similar premise, but your router at home may have a DMZ setting, and then you could pick the specific IPs or devices you wish to be in the DMZ. So if you had a internet-based thermostat and it needed to communicate with an application, but you didn't necessarily want the vulnerability to be on your internal network, you could put that in the DMZ. It wouldn't have access to your internal network, but you could still communicate to it through the app on your phone, because it would be going to their server and then back to the thermostat. Make sense? I'm not getting any nods.
Wait, say that one more time.
So say you have one of those like fancy ring thermostats, where you can
More popular Nest. The Nest ones are.
Yeah, but I say
Yeah,
like
Nest.
the Nest thermostat.
that's almost the same family. I think they both got acquired by Amazon, I believe. So you have your thermostat,
That's
your Nest.
Google.
Oh, Google. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. And sorry, other conglomerate. So you have your network-based thermostat, okay, and so you have your home network here, and you can have your firewall, and then you can and then they'll have weak access over here. And then so what you'll do is you'll isolate the thermostat from your internal network. So it can't, if somebody breaks into that thermostat, they can't access your internal network, but it can still be accessed from the web, because you control that thermostat through a specialized app on your phone, right? So they have the Nest app, and you would go to the Nest app, and that's how you would control the temperature in your house, right?
Right.
So when I'm communicating with the Nest app, I'm sending information out to Nest, and then they're sending the instructions back to the thermostat.
Okay.
So the thermostat doesn't necessarily need to be inside my network. It can be in the DMZ, which is beyond a layer of protection. So I could take things like my Ring doorbell, my Nest thermostat, the smoke detectors or what have you, have all of those in the DMZ, so they're not necessarily a threat to my network, but I can still communicate them through the application, right?
Now, do they already come like that in the demilitarized zone, or no?
No, you would actually have to put them there. So you would figure out what their IP address is.
Oh, okay.
And then, and then you could go into your router and say, place this device in the DMZ.
Oh, okay. Got it.
You can do that at home yourself, but it does require additional capital and everything else, because what you would do is get a firewall to separate your routers, that all-in-one router that has the Wi-Fi and all that crap. You could have that be your guest side, and
That is
then
this
everything
layer
behind,
right here.
yeah. And you can have everything else inside of your network, your home PC and so forth, behind that firewall or behind a, USG, UTM, ATM, those different ones. All right.
All right.
If I'm not mistaken, the basic DMZ that is set up on your router, if you put something there, you're literally putting it outside the firewall of the router, and there's no secondary firewall there.
Zero. So I
So
would utilize, I would
it's
use,
wide open.
yeah, I would utilize that primary, you know, garbage one they give you still for the ring and so forth, so on. You still don't want that open just to the World Wide Web like that. And then beyond that point, creates another, secure network.
Yeah, but
So you would,
for the purposes of the exam.
Sorry. Yeah. Let's
So
not talk about
this
that.
is this. We're getting into real world versus exam.
True.
So for the purposes of exam, you would take a device that you didn't trust and you would put it in the DMZ through your router.
okay,
In reality, this wall wouldn't be there. So it would be literally wide open on the internet and can be hacked apart.
but due to your firewall that you have over there, like on the
Yes.
first layer, you would still be protected, right?
Well, your network is, but the device you put out there is not. It has zero protection at that point unless you have another firewall in place.
And that's the one, Greg, you say that you
That's
would
what he's
have to
talking
like
about,
buy
getting a hardware firewall.
Okay. Man, now y'all gonna make me go to the store and buy new stuff.
You don't need to go buy anything right now.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't. You learn a little bit more about it, man. Get into
Yeah.
once you get to the network side, you should be able to maneuver that pretty well.
We're laying foundations so you have enough knowledge to continue your education as you see fit once you get out of here. It's basically the goal. All right, next, port forwarding and mapping. See, Yuki, can you please read about port forwarding and mapping, please?
Port forwarding and mapping. Port forwarding, also known as port mapping, is the act of mapping one port to another. It allows external users to access the private LAN. This is useful when you want to allow only some external users, partners, for example, to be able to access the network resources remotely. The purpose of this is to hide the real IP address. The purpose of this is to hide the real IP address of the destination device or server to protect it from connections outside the LAN.
Excellent. So you guys remember the conversation we had about the security camera and how, say, the security camera, how you would normally connect to it would be through port 80. But what we would do is we would set on our firewall or our router, when we come in, we would connect to some obscure port. So we would hit the IP address of our router on port 35,280. And if that port is triggered, it would send us directly to port 80 on that security camera. So we're essentially setting up a way to get to it. We're not having to type in the IP address, and we're not leaving that particular port open, that common port. So we're using an obscure port to access that device. And what it's doing is once that port is triggered on the router, then the router knows to forward or map to that other device. So it's just letting us know when we hit that, it sends us to the other location. Does that make sense? It's like a hesitant yes on this one. Okay.
Shaking my head yes if you can see me now.
I can see nothing, Greg or Golly.
I'm
I see a wonderful scenery out the window.
just give you something to look
I do not
outside.
see. I
Yes.
appreciate it. You know, I need more sunlight in my life.
Me too. You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right. The other thing we have is port triggering. And this is so like the port is turned on only when you need it instead of being open all the time. So when traffic is detected on a particular outbound port, it will open up another port for inbound traffic to come in. One of the most common ways this is used is FTP. What's the port for FTP?
2021.
20 and 21, right? So what usually happens is you'll send out an FTP request on port 20, but it'll respond on 21. So if you have your firewall blocking 21 because you're only requesting it on 20, or it's expecting a response on 20, then you got a problem. So what you can set up is like a port trigger. So when I send an FTP request out and it goes out port 20, the router will all of a sudden go, okay, I need to now open up 21 and listen on 21. Then it will automatically open up 21 and wait for that response, where 21 wouldn't be open all the time, only when I initiate it by going out port 20. So it's a event that triggers another port to open up. So that's what port triggering is. So the port would normally be closed. I send a communication out 20, and as soon as the communication goes out, the router goes, okay, open up 21 and listen. And then when it comes back, that port will be open and accept the communication coming back. Does this make sense? I always got port forwarding and port triggering confused for some reason. That was me. Yes, Golly.
No, I say yes. I think I got it. I'm trying to learn more about that because I was confused about it too.
Do you need to really know how to do this stuff to pass the exam for like this stuff? No, you just need to understand the concepts of it. They'll get into more detail in it and stuff like networking and stuff like that. It gets a little more in depth. This, you just need to basically understand what you're doing. So what is port forwarding doing? It's like basically if I send a letter to generation, but I assign it to Rachel, if it hits there and they see Rachel on it, they automatically know, well, no, it's not necessarily meant to go to Rachel, it's meant to go to Kelly. So they're redirecting it or mapping it to them or to me. So I pick port 35,625. It hits that port and they go, okay, anything that hits this port needs to be directed to this device onto this port. So you're creating a map for it to go. And then triggering is I create an event where I make a request out port 20. And once that request is made, another port opens up because it knows the response is going to come in that direction. All right. Firewall settings. Talked about this quite a bit. So all routers, both wired and wireless, have firewalls kind of put on there. They're not extremely robust pieces, but again, it's a layer. It's creating that extra layer for you. The built-in firewall feature, it's kind of acts on entry point restrictions. Like you can create an ACL for it. And it kind of operates in a stateful manner where it's paying attention to what you're requesting and saying like, okay, we've requested, it should come in. But it is kind of a low level firewall, but it has, I think they usually have like 3 or 4 settings, which is like low, medium, high. And trust me, when I say high, you're going to start blocking a whole bunch of legitimate traffic. Low, you're pretty much not doing anything. So people usually play with these settings until they find out where they want to be. All right. Other settings that we have briefly talked about here: content filtering and parental controls. So you can set up things and say like, I don't want them to go to gambling or adult sites or what have you. And the router will not allow those types of sites to come through. Parental controls. You can say, I don't want them to go to these specific websites, or I don't want any content that is above this rating. Like, I'm okay with a G rating or a PG-13 rating. So if the content itself is rated, it's not going to be able to be allowed through. If it has explicit material, like if there's a lot of cuss words and stuff, you can restrict it because it'll be marked explicit usually, not always. But so this is a setting on there where you can actually restrict the type of content coming through, or enable parental controls where you can block specific websites or certain grades of content. Questions so far? I would not fully trust in this, but it helps. All right, other things you can do, disable ports. If you don't need them, block access to them. If you are not running a web server in your house, you likely don't need ports 80 and 443 open on your network. You can shut those down. You know, if the particular services are not ones you use, you can block those ports and shut them down so that they don't work anymore, which limits your attack vector or surface, you know, vulnerabilities for your network. Other thing, make sure your firmware on your routers and other devices are up to date, because there are vulnerabilities that come out or we become aware of. And if you're not updating the security features and stuff like that, that can leave your device open to different types of attacks. It's always an arms race whenever these updates come out. They wait for them. When they see them come out, it kind of gives them gives hackers an idea as to what vulnerabilities they can attack on. So they will actually start trying to attack different settings based upon when these updates come out. And it's kind of a race between you updating it and them getting into your network before you update it. So. Next, physical security. We went over a lot of that this morning. Obviously, you don't need to install a man trap in your house. Likely a small office will not have something like this, but at least put a lock on the door that leads to your server room or cabinets or what have you. Wherever you keep your routers and stuff like that, have them secured so people can have access to them. Remember, if they have physical access to your systems, they own them. And please, please turn off WPS, because they have a button on top of your router that says WPS. And all you gotta do is walk in and push that button and they can hook up to your router. Most times they don't even need to do that if you have it turned on. They can initiate it themselves if they know what they're doing. So you wanna limit people's physical access to your devices like your routers. All right. Quick overview for SOHO routers. We're talking about our SSIDs, set our encryption levels, disabling broadcast, WPS, turn it off, and antenna and access point placement. All right, as we talked about a little bit earlier, change that default SSID, because it can really easily let people know what kind of equipment you're using. That can give them indicators as to what kind of vulnerabilities your network is susceptible to. It can let them know what kind of default passwords are used so that they can try to bypass that stuff if you haven't updated it yet. They can get in, take over your access points if you do not do this stuff, and then they can lock you out of your own systems. Because if you haven't changed anything, they know the administrative passwords, the generic passwords they use, that gives them administrative level access. They can go in and shut you out of your own network. So another reason to make sure this is taken care of. So one less thing you got to worry about. Setting encryption. With regards to the A+, there are 3 that they pay attention to, which is WEP, WPA, and WPA2. You should always use the highest level of encryption that is allowable by your system, you know, so that all your devices can work. Some older devices may not be able to work on WPA2, so you may have to go down to WPA. And WEP is better than nothing, but as we talked about before, it's bypassable in just a few minutes with somebody who knows what they're doing, because it uses static keys. Do we remember what WPA uses?
TCAP.
So, TKIP. Very good. What does WPA2 use?
AES.
AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. Very good. All right, another thing we can do is disable SSID broadcast. This is another one of those ones that is technically a security measure, but not really. Anybody with a Wi-Fi analyzer, and you can download free ones on your phone and use them and sniff out networks, even if they're not broadcasting. But again, it's another layer. It makes it slightly more difficult. And basically what it is, whoever's logging into your network has to have the exact network name and password if they don't have a Wi-Fi analyzer to be able to log into your network. So what it is if you try to discover the network, you won't see it in your list. Again, unless you're using a Wi-Fi analyzer. So if you want to play around with those, look on Google Play Store and the Apple Store. You can download free Wi-Fi analyzers on your phone and play around with them. It's another security tool. WPS, Wi-Fi protected setup. Again, this is a hacked protocol. They can identify the PIN used in a very short period of time and gain access to your network through that. So if you have this on your router, how many of you turned this off on your router? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, all right, 4, good. So yeah, we want to get in there, disable this on a router. If we have them on printers, turn it off on your printers. Yes, it's convenient. What's the balance we have to maintain? Convenience versus security, right? The more convenient something is, typically the less secure it is. So we have to keep that in mind. Antenna and access point placement. So, as we all know, antennas broadcast signal out. Now, we want to be able to get full coverage of our environment. Like, right, so if we're in our house, we want to make sure we can get it in our bedroom, we can get it in our kitchen, we can get it in our living room or our dining room or whatever. So our whole house, we want to be able to receive that Wi-Fi signal, right? Now, do we want that signal strong enough where we can pick it up in the woods behind our house? Probably not, right? So what you want to do is you want to try to set it up to where the signal does not bleed much beyond your boundaries. So you want to try to minimize that as much as you can. So like in an enterprise environment, they would actually turn down the power of the antennas so that it wouldn't bleed out into the parking lot, because they don't want somebody sitting out in the parking lot all day trying to figure out how to get access to their Wi-Fi. So don't underestimate the ability of turning down the power of an antenna as a security measure, because you want to restrict the bubble of how far that signal is going to go. Usually people are trying to think, I want to turn it up. I want to get better signal wherever I'm going. You're like, I've got 6 acres and I want to be able to, listen to my Bluetooth headset all the way back in the, So no, we want to be able to limit that as much as we can. And especially in an office building setting, because we don't want people outside of the office trying to get in. All right. The other thing you have to pay attention to, though, is with your placement is being able to get that signal everywhere, because there are some materials that kind of absorb the signal a little bit. I don't know if you notice, like if you don't put the antenna high enough, you may not get it as far in your house because you have wooden furniture or something like that, and that kind of dampens the signal a little bit. If you're in a house that's got concrete walls, it's really hard to get Wi-Fi signals through concrete. It really absorbs those signals. Metal studs in the walls. That has, we have problems with that with Wi-Fi signals. Some materials actually reflect the signal, so it bounces off of it. It doesn't pass through it, it bounces off of it. Network Plus, they'll talk about this for their, depending on what you're dealing with, you have to deal with what's called reflection, refraction, where part of it goes through and part of it bounces, and absorption, where all of it gets absorbed and nothing really passes through. So you want to make sure it's placed well so that the people who need that signal are still getting it, but not so much that it's bleeding out beyond your borders, your control. Questions on that? Again, we don't need to be experts in this. We just need to understand, try to put it in a place where the signal reaches everybody, but not so much that it goes beyond our control. Don't put it next to the microwave, because every time you turn the microwave on, it's going to kill your signal if you're on the 2.4 gigahertz. Yes, Golly.
Two questions. So if let's say like where you put the router is like not next to the microwave, but like across a wall from the microwave, would that still affect it, or would that?
Well, it would affect it, say, if, say, let's get my handy dandy pen out here. I know you guys are saying I need to get a stylus. Shame on you.
Handy dandy notebook.
So, we got a microwave here. We have the Wi-Fi router here. Let's give it little antennas. Little signals coming out. Now, say your desk was here. So you get your Wi-Fi router here, you get the microwave here, there's a little kitchenette, and your desk is on the other side of the kitchen. If you're operating on 2.4, every time they turn on that microwave, that's going to kill your ability to reach that signal.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So okay.
Now, if your desk was back here, it's unlikely the microwave would have much effect.
Okay, got it. And then the antennas and the like, is that like that's just like that's a physical thing, right? That's not something you configured inside the router for like the range and stuff. It's just like that's just the physical antenna that you're moving with the access point.
Well, they do have routers that look like upside down spiders, where they have like 8 or 9 antennas, and understand that the signal comes out horizontally from it. So if the antenna is vertical, the signal is going to come out horizontally. If it's angled, it's going to go like up at an angle and down at an angle. If it's flat, it's going to go vertically. So the position of the antennas is important, because you're trying to get as much coverage as you can. But again, that's more of a Network Plus real life thing, not so much an A+ thing.
Got it.
But inside the, in the router settings, yes, you're going to set the power, so you can adjust your power level of your antennas.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what.
But and depending on the router, will determine whether or not you use 2.5, 5, or both. So depending on what generation router you have will determine what bandwidth you're operating off of. So like on 5, the microwave is going to be less of an issue, but 5 does not travel through walls very well. So 5 gets disrupted by walls and barriers much more readily than, say, a 2.4. 2.4 penetrates walls very well and has a better range. 5 has a greater throughput, shorter range.
Right. Okay. All right. And last question.
Yeah, go for it.
Does my background does it for you now?
Rather soothing.
Okay.
Reminds me when I was in college, I used to go down and work on sailboats on vacation. I would get, it was a working vacation for me. I'd actually go down there and work on, first mates on sailboats for charters and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
You've done everything, brother.
Right? Like he got a story for like every single thing.
For real. All I got are IT stories, man. I have none of these cool stories.
I only did
Greg
that for a
is like,
couple
6 hours
years,
later, I work
but
for
it was-
computers.
but it was, I mean, it was weird saying like I needed to take a vacation from work to go work. You know, so I would go down there and, you know, I'd work on the sailboats and stuff like that for like 2 weeks, and it would pay for my trip down there, the food, and I'd come back with like $300-400 or something like that.
Trust me, I feel the same way, man. I live in Florida, so I mean South Florida, so you know already. People's like,
Yeah.
oh, but you live in the perfect vacation. I'm like, no, sir, I gotta work. I got
Yeah, right. So
I take vacations from here to go to like Jamaica or somewhere else. Yeah.
we had a student from Jamaica like 4 cohorts ago, and you know, he used to love it because he had family there. It'd take him $50-60 to fly to Jamaica, and then he just stayed with family. So he'd go down there for the weekend or something like that.
$50-60?
Yeah, he was
It's
flying out.
500,
Well, yeah,
$600. Oh, because
But
he
that
was
was like-
probably
go
years
ahead.
ago. No, sorry.
Yeah, this was
I'm
a couple years
surprised.
ago.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, right now probably not the same thing, but yeah, a couple years ago, that's what he would do.
Yeah, it's like 600 right now, man. 550, 600.
So and it probably had something to do with military discount as well because he was retired Army.
Oh, okay.
So, all right. Any questions on this? We all experts? Are we getting a little bit more comfortable noticing that there are things we can do? There are measures we can put in place to kind of protect ourselves and the companies a little bit more. And it's not so bleak.
Yeah, layers.
It's all about the layers, man. It's like when you live up in the north and it's like -50 degrees. It's all about the layers, you know?
Oh, that was the end of that one?
Huh?
That was the end of the you normally do a little wrap up. I wasn't sure if you were taking a break or
Would I give you guys a technical session without a quiz?
there we go. I shouldn't have asked.
Here it comes.
By now, Greg's favorite slide. We should be able to explain the value of going the extra effort to protect data on our SOHO networks. We should be able to talk about some strategies, both securing our wired and wireless networks as well, and then some unique strategies for securing our wireless network, like changing the SSID, MAC filtering, disabling SSID broadcast, turning off WPS, things like that. Comments, questions, complaints?
That WPS setting, that's in the network. You select your router, right?
When you set up, yeah, when you go into your router settings, WPS is in there. You can turn it off.
Yeah, I was looking for it. I think I already changed it. I couldn't find it.
It should be in there. But you know, if you use Comcast or Xfinity, you know, Xfinity or Verizon or AT&T, you should have the ability to turn that off. Even if you buy third parties, you should have that ability to turn it off. Although if you have the ability, getting a good third-party router gives you much more control over your network rather than using the one provided by your ISP. And you don't have to pay the rent anymore. Because they charge you what, $10 a month for them now? Something like that? Just for your router?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I did. As soon as I found out, like they did charge, I thought it came for free, and I looked at the bill and it said that. I was like, I can just buy one of those and replace it, right? They were like, "Yep." I was like, okay. And the next
And
day,
then you get to keep it when you're done.
Yeah, I called the guy back. I said, "You can take that router. I already owe the one off Amazon."
There you go.
I'm not
And they're
paying $10 a month.
usually more robust and you get better throughputs on your Wi-Fi and stuff like that too.
Yeah, they try to scare you away and try to say, "Oh, you know, if you get the
Not
wrong
all of them are
one."
compatible.
Yeah, exactly. They say, "Oh, it's not compatible. You're gonna have problem." I say, "You know, I'll take my chances."